The Atlantic is black and restless. In the early hours of November 1942, hundreds of Allied ships cut through the water in silence. Their decks are crowded with young American soldiers. Most of them have never heard a shot fired in anger. Many have never even seen the enemy. Yet tonight, they are crossing into war. Not the war Americans imagined. There are no beaches in France ahead of them, no march on Berlin. Instead, the destination is North Africa, Morocco, and Algeria, territory controlled not by Germany, but by France's Vichy government. Former allies, uncertain enemies, men who may resist, surrender, or fight, depending on decisions still being argued far above the surf. This is Operation Torch, America's first large-scale amphibious and ground campaign in the European Mediterranean War. A gamble designed to test an unproven army, satisfy desperate allies, and force the Axis to react before Germany can concentrate its strength elsewhere. For the United States, this is not a decisive blow. It is an examination. The troops aboard these ships are carrying more than rifles and packs. They are carrying expectations, British doubts about American readiness, German assumptions about American weakness, and their own belief that industrial power alone can win wars. By dawn on 8 November 1942, landing craft will grind onto unfamiliar beaches. Shots will be exchanged, confusion will reign. Some French units will fight hard, others will hesitate. None of it will unfold cleanly. And almost immediately, the war will widen. Because Torch is not meant to end in North Africa. It is meant to open a door, one that leads directly toward German forces, racing into Tunisia, and toward an American army about to learn what modern war actually demands. This is where theory meets blood, and where America discovers that entering Hitler's war is far more complicated than declaring it. America does not arrive in North Africa by choice alone. By late 1941, the United States is already at war, but not yet at war with Germany on land. Pearl Harbor has pulled the country into a global conflict overnight. The Navy and Army Air Forces are fighting Japan across the Pacific. Meanwhile, in Europe, Britain is exhausted, the Soviet Union is bleeding, and Germany still controls most of the continent. Pressure mounts quickly. From London, British leaders argue that the United States must enter the European war as soon as possible, but not recklessly. Britain has learned, at enormous cost, what happens when underprepared armies meet German forces head-on. From Moscow, the demands are harsher. The Red Army is locked in a life-or-death struggle, and Soviet leaders want a second front opened immediately to relieve the pressure. Washington sits between these realities. The U.S. Army, in 1942, is large on paper but raw in practice. It has expanded rapidly, absorbing millions of men in a matter of months. Training is uneven, commanders are untested, equipment is improving, but doctrine is still theoretical. A direct invasion of northern France, what many politicians imagine as the fastest way to strike Germany, is simply not possible yet. The Allies need time. They also need a battlefield where mistakes, while costly, will not be catastrophic. A place where sea control is already established, where air power can dominate, and where failure will not expose the British Isles or the American homeland to immediate danger. That place is the Mediterranean. For Britain, North Africa is familiar ground. British forces have been fighting there since 1940, against Italian armies, and later against German formations sent to stabilize the Axis position. The Desert War has proven brutal, fluid, and unforgiving, but it has also shown that Axis forces can be beaten outside Europe itself. For the United States, the region offers something else. Distance from Germany's main strength. An invasion in North Africa would allow American forces to land against weaker defenses, build combat experience, and begin learning how to coordinate large-scale amphibious operations alongside the British. It would also threaten the Axis from the south, forcing Germany to divert resources away from the Eastern Front and from preparations in Western Europe. This logic does not go unchallenged. Within Allied leadership, debates are intense. Some American planners argue that every delay in striking directly at Germany prolongs the war. Others counter that an unready invasion could end in disaster, damaging Allied credibility and morale far more than waiting. President Roosevelt ultimately sides with caution, but not passivity. The goal becomes clear: enter the European war decisively, but on ground of the Allies' choosing. North Africa is not the final objective. It is a beginning, a proving ground, where the United States Army can be tested under fire, and where Allied cooperation can be forged in practice rather than theory. By mid-1942, the outline of the plan takes shape. American forces will land alongside British units in Morocco and Algeria. The operation will be vast, complex, and politically risky. It will involve long sea crossings, difficult coordination, and the uncertain reaction of French forces who do not neatly fit into the categories of ally or enemy. Yet, despite these risks, the alternative is worse. To wait is to concede initiative. To rush unprepared into Northern Europe is to gamble everything on an army that has never fought the Germans before. North Africa becomes the compromise where strategy, politics, and reality intersect. And once that decision is made, a second problem, far less predictable and far more dangerous, moves to the center of planning. The second problem has a name: Vichy France. After France's collapse in 1940, its empire does not simply disappear from the war. Instead, it fractures. The government based at Vichy remains officially neutral, but collaborates with Germany under the terms of the armistice. Its armed forces in North Africa, French troops, ships, and airfields, exist in a political gray zone. They are not Axis forces. They are not Allied forces. And no one can predict how they will respond to an invasion. This uncertainty defines Operation Torch more than any German plan. Allied intelligence paints an incomplete picture. Some French officers are believed to be quietly sympathetic to the Allies. Others are committed to Vichy authority and resent both Britain and the United States. Memories of British attacks on French ships in 1940 still linger, fueling distrust. Loyalty varies by region, by commander, and by circumstance. The Allies choose to gamble. Rather than announcing an invasion as a liberation, they plan for ambiguity. Diplomatic channels are opened in secret. Messages are sent. Assurances are made that American forces come not to conquer French territory, but to prevent it from falling fully into German hands. The hope is that, once confronted with reality, French resistance will be limited or collapse altogether. This hope is not shared evenly. In Algiers, political currents are already shifting. Local resistance networks, sympathetic officers, and behind-the-scenes negotiations create the possibility of a rapid transition. In Oran and Casablanca, the situation is far less predictable. Commanders there have stronger ties to Vichy authority and fewer incentives to stand down quickly. Allied planners accept this unevenness as unavoidable. They prepare for 3 invasions at once: western Morocco, central Algeria, and eastern Algeria, each with different political and military conditions. The plan assumes friction, confusion, and local resistance, but also counts on speed to prevent Germany from exploiting the chaos. Time is the enemy. If Torch bogs down in prolonged fighting with French forces, Germany will react. Axis troops could rush into Tunisia, seize key ports and airfields, and transform North Africa into a fortified front far more difficult to crack. The window for success is narrow, measured in days rather than weeks. This urgency shapes every decision. Landings are scheduled simultaneously to overwhelm French command and prevent coordinated resistance. Political envoys accompany military forces, ready to negotiate even as fighting unfolds. Commanders are instructed to accept surrenders quickly, avoid unnecessary destruction, and keep the operation moving forward. Even so, no one expects a clean outcome. Operation Torch is approved not because it is safe, but because the alternatives are worse. It risks fighting former allies. It risks confusion on the beaches. It risks handing Germany an excuse to expand its control deeper into France's former empire. But it also offers something no other option can provide in 1942. A chance for the United States Army to enter the European war at scale. A chance to seize initiative without facing Germany's full strength head-on. And a chance to turn uncertainty into momentum before the Axis can respond. As invasion fleets close on the North African coast, political calculation gives way to reality. Negotiations will soon be tested by gunfire, assumptions will be tested by resistance or surrender. And for the first time, American soldiers will discover how fragile plans become once the ramps drop and boots hit foreign soil. The reality of Operation Torch becomes clear the moment the landings begin. For American troops, this is not just an invasion, it is their first true encounter with modern war on land. Until now, the U.S. Army has trained, drilled, and rehearsed, but almost entirely without the pressure of an enemy trying to stop them. North Africa removes that safety. The soldiers arriving on the beaches of Morocco and Algeria carry new weapons, fresh uniforms, and confidence built on industry and optimism. What they lack is experience. Many units have never operated together under fire. Officers have studied doctrine, not chaos. Enlisted men know procedures, not fear. Torch exposes that gap immediately. Landing craft miss their intended beaches. Units become separated in darkness. Communications break down under the simplest strain. Orders arrive late, or not at all. In several sectors, American troops are forced to improvise within minutes of coming ashore, an ability they have not yet been trained to trust. Equipment adds to the challenge. Weapons function, but crews struggle to use them efficiently. Vehicles bog down in unfamiliar terrain. Coordination between infantry, armor, and artillery is uneven. Air support, while available, is not yet seamlessly integrated into ground operations. Everything works, but not together. And then there is the enemy problem no one can fully prepare for. The first shots many American soldiers face are fired by French troops. This creates confusion that no briefing can fully resolve. These are not German uniforms. These are not soldiers raised on years of Allied propaganda. Some French units fight with determination. Others hesitate, unsure of their orders or their loyalties. The result is a battlefield filled with uncertainty rather than clarity. That uncertainty costs time and lives. In several areas, resistance is stronger than planners hoped. Coastal batteries fire on Allied ships. Small unit engagements drag on longer than expected. American casualties mount, not because the opposition is overwhelming, but because coordination is still fragile. Leadership is tested brutally. Officers accustomed to controlled exercises must now make decisions with incomplete information. Some adapt quickly, learning when to push and when to pause. Others struggle, relying too heavily on rigid plans that no longer fit the situation unfolding around them. This uneven performance is not failure. It is education. Operation Torch becomes a compressed training ground, where mistakes are paid for immediately and lessons are learned under fire. American units begin to understand the importance of flexibility, initiative, and clear command relationships. They learn that modern war does not reward perfect plans, it rewards adaptation. British observers notice the transformation as it happens. Having fought the Germans for years, British commanders recognize the signs of an army in transition. The Americans are not yet polished, but they are absorbing experience rapidly. Under pressure, their weaknesses are visible, but so is their capacity to improve. The terrain itself becomes a teacher. North Africa's cities, ports, and open approaches force American forces to operate across varied environments in a short time. Urban fighting, rapid advances, and logistical movement all occur simultaneously. The campaign refuses to stay simple, and in doing so, accelerates learning. By the time initial resistance begins to fade, the U.S. Army is already different from the force that stepped off the ships. It has taken casualties. It has made mistakes. And it has survived its first test. But the hardest lesson still lies ahead. Because Operation Torch is not only about landing successfully, it is about what comes next, about how quickly Germany can react, and how well an inexperienced American army can withstand the attention of a far more dangerous enemy. The landings are over. The real examination is about to begin. What happens next tests more than tactics. It tests leadership, politics, and restraint. At the center of Operation Torch stands a relatively unknown American general, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Torch is his first command of a coalition force at this scale, and its complexity is unlike anything the United States has attempted before. He is not just directing troops. He is balancing national interests, fragile alliances, and political realities that shift by the hour. Every decision carries consequences beyond the battlefield. British commanders bring experience and caution. American leaders bring energy and urgency. French authorities bring uncertainty. Eisenhower's task is not to impose control through force alone, but to keep the coalition functioning while events unfold faster than any headquarters can fully manage. That challenge becomes immediate. As fighting breaks out across Morocco and Algeria, political negotiations occur almost in parallel with combat. In some areas, French commanders resist fiercely. In others, local agreements and command shifts lead to sudden ceasefires. The collapse of resistance is uneven, not because of weakness, but because loyalty within the Vichy system is fragmented. This unevenness creates moral tension for Allied troops. American soldiers are ordered to advance, while political envoys negotiate surrender terms nearby. In some cases, gunfire stops abruptly. In others, it continues until commanders receive clear instructions. Soldiers learn, often uncomfortably, that war is not always decided by battlefield dominance alone. The enemy response complicates matters further. Germany does not wait to see how Torch unfolds. As soon as Allied intentions are clear, German command moves quickly to secure Tunisia. Air and ground forces begin deploying into the region, exploiting the narrow window before Allied forces can reach it. What begins as an operation against Vichy-controlled territory now escalates into direct confrontation with Axis power. This shift alters the moral landscape. Torch is no longer simply about navigating former alliances. It becomes a race, one in which hesitation risks allowing German forces to establish a strong defensive position. Allied commanders must move forward even as political arrangements in the rear are still settling. For American troops, the meaning of the campaign sharpens. They are no longer advancing through uncertainty alone. They are advancing toward an enemy with a reputation earned over years of success in Europe. German formations arriving in Tunisia are experienced, disciplined, and confident. They bring with them a level of tactical competence that Vichy forces simply cannot match. The psychological impact is immediate. American units begin to understand that North Africa is not a sideshow. It is becoming a front line. Early optimism gives way to caution. Confidence is tempered by awareness. The campaign's tone shifts from improvisation to preparation. Leadership adapts in real time. Commanders learn quickly which approaches work and which fail. Coordination with British units improves. Intelligence sharing becomes more urgent. Doctrine begins to bend under pressure, making room for practical solutions shaped by the realities of terrain and enemy behavior. Eisenhower's role evolves as well. He is no longer just managing an invasion. He is orchestrating a transition from a politically sensitive landing operation into a sustained campaign against Axis forces. Every compromise made early in Torch now has to support the next phase of the war, not undermine it. The moral dimension remains unresolved. American forces have fought French troops. They have negotiated ceasefires. They have watched loyalties shift with stunning speed. None of it fits neatly into wartime narratives of clear enemies and clear victories. But those ambiguities are part of Torch's legacy. They reflect the reality of coalition warfare. Operation Torch exposes the uncomfortable truth that wars are rarely clean at the beginning. Alliances fracture. Old enemies become new partners. Decisions are made under pressure, with imperfect information, and lived with long afterward. As the political dust settles and Allied control of North Africa consolidates, attention turns eastward. German forces are digging in. Supply lines are extending. And American units are about to face a far more dangerous test than beach landings or negotiations. Torch has opened the door. What waits beyond it will determine whether this first strike becomes a foundation or a warning. The first true turning point comes not in a single clash, but in a widening realization. By mid-November 1942, it is clear that Operation Torch has survived its most politically dangerous phase. Vichy resistance across North Africa collapses unevenly, but decisively. In Algiers, French command shifts quickly. In Oran and Casablanca, fighting lingers longer, then fades. What remains is an Allied foothold stretching across thousands of miles of coastline. But survival is not success. The decisive test begins when the campaign turns east toward Tunisia. German command has moved faster than many Allied planners hoped. Within days of the Torch landings, German aircraft are landing at Tunisian airfields. Troops follow by sea and air. What had been lightly held territory becomes a rapidly strengthening Axis bridgehead. This is no symbolic move. It is a calculated effort to block Allied expansion and stabilize the southern flank of German control. For American forces, the shift is immediate and sobering. This is no longer an operation defined by negotiation and uncertainty. It is now a race against an experienced enemy. U.S. Units advancing east encounter organized resistance, disciplined withdrawals, and coordinated countermeasures. German formations know how to delay, how to exploit terrain, and how to strike exposed units without overcommitting. The battlefield hardens. Supply lines stretch thin as Allied forces push forward faster than infrastructure can support them. Roads are poor, ports are distant. Coordination between units, still improving, is not yet seamless. American troops move with determination, but also with growing awareness that enthusiasm alone does not stop a trained opponent. The environment compounds the challenge. North Africa's terrain shifts from coastal plains to rugged hills and open expanses that offer little cover. Weather turns unpredictable. Dust chokes engines and men alike. Movement becomes exhausting, and mistakes become more costly. German units exploit these conditions, forcing engagements on their terms whenever possible. Early encounters expose weaknesses. American formations struggle with combined arms coordination. Infantry advances without sufficient armor support. Artillery fire is sometimes slow to respond. Communication gaps widen under pressure. These are not failures of courage, but of experience, and the enemy recognizes the difference immediately. German commanders probe aggressively. They test American lines, identify soft points, and strike where coordination falters. These actions are not meant to destroy the Allied force outright, but to teach it painful lessons. Each engagement reinforces the reality that North Africa has become a proving ground against the Wehrmacht, not a peripheral theater. Leadership begins to adapt under fire. Field commanders adjust tactics. Units learn to dig in quickly, to coordinate movement more carefully, to respect the enemy's ability to counterattack. British units, already seasoned by desert warfare, provide guidance and stability where possible. The coalition begins to function more cohesively, though not without friction. At higher levels, the implications are unmistakable. Operation Torch has succeeded strategically. It has brought American ground forces into the European Mediterranean War and denied the Axis control of Western North Africa. But tactically and operationally, it has exposed how much the U.S. Army still has to learn. And that knowledge arrives at a dangerous moment, because German forces in Tunisia are not withdrawing. They are consolidating, digging in, preparing to fight. The campaign has crossed a threshold. What began as America's first large-scale landing has become a sustained confrontation with a formidable enemy. From this point forward, Torch will no longer be judged by whether it opened the war, but by whether the Allied forces it introduced can endure it. The next phase will decide that question. The confrontation hardens as winter settles in. By late November and December 1942, the campaign in Tunisia has lost any sense of improvisation. German forces are no longer arriving in fragments. They are organized, supplied, and increasingly confident that the Allies can be held at bay. What began as a race has become a contest of endurance. For American units, this is the most demanding phase yet. U.S. forces begin encountering German formations in sustained combat, not as isolated contacts, but as part of a coordinated enemy defense. The Wehrmacht's approach is methodical. Positions are chosen carefully. Counterattacks are limited, precise, and timed to exploit Allied hesitation. Nothing is wasted, nothing is rushed. The contrast is instructive and painful. American units often advance with determination but insufficient coordination. Armor moves without full infantry support. Artillery is sometimes slow to shift fire. Air-ground cooperation, still developing, struggles to keep pace with fast-moving engagements. German commanders recognize these gaps immediately and press them hard. Small defeats accumulate. Positions are lost, regained, and lost again. Units learn how quickly momentum can turn when communication fails or terrain is misunderstood. Casualties mount, not in dramatic spikes, but in steady numbers that wear down confidence. Each engagement forces a reassessment of tactics, leadership, and assumptions formed far from the battlefield. The German objective is clear. They are not trying to drive the Allies back into the sea. They are trying to buy time. Every week held in Tunisia delays Allied plans elsewhere. Every American unit slowed or disrupted postpones the moment when the coalition can bring its full weight to bear. The environment favors the defender. Tunisia's hills and narrow approaches limit maneuver. Winter rains turn roads into mud. Supply convoys struggle to reach forward positions. Allied air power, while formidable, is constrained by weather and distance. German units exploit these conditions, forcing battles at points where advantage can be maximized. For American leadership, the moment is sobering. Reports from the front reveal systemic issues. Training has emphasized movement and firepower, but not enough coordination under pressure. Junior officers lack experience managing chaos. Command structures are too rigid for a fluid battlefield. These observations are not theoretical, they are written in losses and setbacks. Yet adaptation begins. Units rotate. Tactics are adjusted. Commanders learn to slow down, to reconnoiter, to integrate artillery and armor more effectively. British experience in desert warfare becomes increasingly valuable, offering hard-earned lessons in maneuver and defense against German methods. At higher levels, changes are set in motion. Allied command begins reshaping how American forces fight. Training priorities shift even as the campaign continues. Leadership appointments are reassessed. The goal is no longer simply to hold ground, but to transform the force while it is already engaged. This dual-task fighting and learning simultaneously is costly, but it is also unavoidable. Operation Torch was never intended to be easy. It was intended to be instructive. Tunisia becomes the crucible in which American assumptions are tested and, often, broken. What emerges is not yet a polished army, but one that understands the price of underestimating a capable enemy. By early 1943, the shape of the campaign is set. The Allies hold western North Africa. German forces remain entrenched in Tunisia. Neither side can disengage without consequence. The front has stabilized, but only temporarily. Behind the lines, reforms are taking shape. At the front, pressure continues. The decisive outcome of Torch is no longer measured in miles gained or lost. It is measured in transformation. An American army that entered the war uncertain and untested is being reshaped under fire. The lessons learned here will echo forward to Sicily, to Italy, and eventually to the beaches of northern France. But before those future battles can unfold, the immediate consequences of Torch must be understood. What did this first strike actually achieve, and at what cost? The immediate results of Operation Torch become visible before the campaign in Tunisia is even decided. Strategically, the map of the war has shifted. With Morocco and Algeria secured, the Allies now control the western half of North Africa. Axis access to the Atlantic approaches is cut off. The Mediterranean, long contested, begins to tilt decisively toward Allied dominance. Sea lanes open, airfields multiply. What was once a peripheral theater becomes a staging ground for sustained operations. Politically, the impact is just as significant. The Vichy French position in North Africa collapses as a viable force. French commanders, faced with Allied control and German pressure elsewhere, pivot rapidly. Authority realigns unevenly but decisively. Formerly neutral territory is absorbed into the Allied war effort, bringing ports, infrastructure, and manpower into play rather than leaving them vulnerable to Axis exploitation. For Germany and Italy, the consequences are immediate and negative. Axis forces are forced into Tunisia, a confined space that offers defense but little strategic flexibility. Supply routes become longer and more vulnerable. Reinforcements must be rushed in under Allied air and naval pressure. What might have been a controllable southern flank turns into a liability that demands constant attention. For the Allies, Torch delivers something less tangible but just as important: confidence, earned under fire. The operation proves that the United States can plan and execute a large-scale amphibious landing across vast distances. It proves that coalition warfare, though messy and politically fraught, can function in practice. And it proves that American forces, despite inexperience, can absorb losses, adapt, and continue fighting. The cost, however, is undeniable. American casualties mount during the landings and the subsequent fighting. Equipment is lost, units are bloodied. Torch does not provide a clean victory narrative. Instead, it offers a clear accounting of weaknesses in leadership, coordination, and doctrine that can no longer be ignored. Those weaknesses become the operation's hidden value. Because they are exposed early, they can be addressed before the war's decisive battles arrive. Training programs are revised, command structures are examined, assumptions are challenged. The lessons learned in North Africa will shape every major American operation that follows. Operation Torch does not end the war in North Africa, but it changes its direction. It locks the Axis into a defensive posture. It gives the Allies a foothold they will not relinquish. And it ensures that when the next campaigns begin, the United States Army will enter them wiser and far more dangerous than when it first stepped ashore. That raises the final question Torch leaves behind. What lasting lessons did this first strike carve into the way America would fight the rest of the war? The lasting effects of Operation Torch are felt long after the gunfire fades. For the United States Army, North Africa becomes a mirror that cannot be ignored. Torch exposes gaps that training exercises had hidden: rigid command habits, poor coordination between arms, and an underestimation of what experienced German forces could do with limited resources. These are not abstract critiques. They are written into reports, casualty lists, and hard-earned after-action reviews. And they lead directly to change. Leadership is reassessed with urgency. Commanders who struggle to adapt are replaced or reassigned. Those who learn quickly are promoted and given greater responsibility. The culture of the Army begins to shift from one that values plans and hierarchy above all else to one that increasingly rewards flexibility, initiative, and coordination under pressure. Doctrine evolves in real time. Combined arms cooperation becomes a priority rather than a theory. Infantry, armor, artillery, and air support are forced to work together more closely because failure to do so has already proven costly. Training programs are redesigned while the war is still being fought, shaped by lessons learned not in classrooms but on Tunisian hillsides. Coalition warfare also matures. Torch teaches the Allies how difficult true partnership can be and how essential. British experience tempers American optimism. American resources reinforce British endurance. Friction remains, but it becomes productive rather than paralyzing. By the time the North African campaign draws toward its conclusion, the coalition is no longer experimental. It is functional. Strategically, the operation pays dividends beyond its immediate theater. With North Africa secured, the Allies gain freedom of movement. Plans for Sicily and Italy become possible. Pressure on Germany increases from the south, forcing it to defend more territory with fewer resources. Torch does not win the war, but it widens it, stretching the Axis in ways that will compound over time. Perhaps most importantly, Torch reshapes expectations. The myth that industrial power alone guarantees battlefield success is dismantled early. In its place emerges a harder truth. Modern war rewards learning faster than the enemy. Torch is where the United States begins learning at speed. By early 1943, American forces are no longer the same ones that landed months earlier. They are tougher, more cautious, and far more aware of what war demands. The price has been paid early before Normandy, before the final drive into Germany. That is Torch's true legacy. It is not remembered for a single decisive battle or a dramatic victory. It is remembered for what it changed quietly, permanently, inside the Allied war effort. And with those changes in place, the story of Operation Torch reaches its final meaning. The meaning of Operation Torch is not found in a single victory map or surrender document. It is found in transformation. When American troops went ashore in North Africa in November 1942, they did not arrive as a finished force. They arrived as a promise: industrial strength, manpower, and confidence still untested against a skilled enemy. Torch stripped away assumptions quickly. It showed, without mercy, that modern war does not reward enthusiasm alone. What Torch provided was something far more valuable than a clean win. It provided truth. Truth about leadership under pressure. Truth about coordination in chaos. Truth about how fast an army must learn if it hopes to survive. In North Africa, the United States learned these lessons early before facing Germany's full strength on the beaches of Sicily, in the mountains of Italy, or on the shores of Normandy. The cost was real, measured in casualties and setbacks, but the timing mattered. Mistakes made here were mistakes that would not be repeated later. Torch also revealed how wars are actually fought. Not in isolation, but in coalitions. Not with perfect plans, but with constant adjustment. Political compromise, uneven alliances, and moral ambiguity were not distractions from the war, they were part of it. Torch forced the Allies to manage all of these realities at once, and to keep moving anyway. For Germany, the operation marked the beginning of strategic compression. North Africa was lost not because of a single defeat, but because the Axis could no longer control events across expanding fronts. Torch widened the war, stretched resources, and accelerated a process that would only intensify in the years that followed. And for history, Operation Torch stands as a reminder. Great powers are not born ready for war. They become ready through failure, adaptation, and endurance. America's first major ground campaign against the Axis was not elegant or decisive, but it was necessary. Torch did not end the war. It taught the United States how to fight it. And that lesson, learned on unfamiliar beaches and in harsh terrain, would echo all the way to victory in Europe.